The year is 1243, and the first light of dawn filters through a veil of mist that clings to the valleys of Burgundy. The air is cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of wet stone and turned earth. In the heart of this landscape, surrounded by forests of oak and beech, stands the Abbey of Cîteaux, Mother House of the Cistercian Order. Its walls, built from local limestone, have already weathered nearly 150 years of seasons. The stones have absorbed countless rains, endless winters, and the quiet prayers of generations of monks who have walked these corridors in silence. The monastery garden lies just beyond the cloister, protected on three sides by covered walkways with rounded arches that frame small windows open to the elements. Through these openings, the wind moves gently, never rushing, carrying the distant sound of bells from the abbey church. The garden itself is divided into neat, rectangular beds, each one bordered by low walls of woven willow or simple wooden planks worn smooth by time and weather. Here, the monks grow medicinal herbs, vegetables for the refectory, and flowers for the altar roses, lilies, and the deep blue of borage that nods in the morning breeze. The paths between the beds are made of packed earth, sometimes scattered with fine gravel brought up from the river. When it rains, as it often does in this part of France, the paths become soft underfoot, and the monks walk with measured steps, their leather sandals leaving shallow impressions that fill slowly with water. The sound of their footsteps is muffled, absorbed by the earth and the thick wool of their habits. Everything here seems designed to quiet the world, to turn down the volume of existence until only the essential sounds remain: the rustle of fabric, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant murmur of water flowing through the irrigation channels that feed the garden beds. Beyond the garden walls, the world of the 13th century continues its slow turning. King Louis IX is still a young man, years away from the crusades that will define his later reign. The Gothic cathedrals are rising across France, their spires reaching toward heaven with an ambition that seems at odds with the horizontal calm of monastic architecture. But here, within these walls, ambition takes a different form. The goal is not height, but depth, not to reach upward, but to sink downward into prayer, into work, into the rhythmic repetition of days that blur into weeks, weeks into seasons, seasons into years. The monastery follows the rule of Saint Benedict, written more than 700 years before this quiet morning. As described in the careful chronicles kept by the abbey scribes, the rule governs every aspect of monastic life, from the hours of prayer to the allocation of manual labor, from the distribution of food to the maintenance of silence. It is a framework that creates peace not through the absence of structure, but through its presence, through knowing exactly what each moment requires, through the elimination of choice and the uncertainty that comes with it. In the garden, a monk bends to examine a bed of lavender. His hood is drawn back, revealing a face weathered by outdoor work, neither old nor young, but timeless in the way of men who live according to rhythms older than themselves. He touches the silvery leaves with fingers that are calloused but gentle. He is not thinking about the future or dwelling on the past. He is here, in this moment, with this plant, in this garden, under this pale morning sky. The mist is beginning to lift, revealing the darker green of the forest beyond the monastery walls, and somewhere in the distance, a bell begins to toll, calling the community to prayer. The day begins in darkness. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the dormitory bell rings, its tone low and resonant, traveling through the stone corridors of the sleeping quarters. The monks rise from their narrow beds, simple wooden frames, with thin straw mattresses and woolen blankets. There is no conversation, no groaning, no complaint. They have done this every night for years, some for decades. Their bodies know the rhythm. They dress in the dark, pulling their white woolen habits over their undergarments, fastening the leather belt at the waist, drawing the scapula over their heads. The black cowl, reserved for choir and formal occasions, remains folded at the foot of each bed. They move through the corridors in single file, their feet whispering against the stone floors. The monastery is unheated, and in winter their breath forms small clouds that dissipate in the darkness. They enter the church for matins and lauds, the night offices, and their voices rise together in chant not melodic in the way of later music, but modal, repetitive, designed to carry the mind into a state of contemplation rather than stimulation. The Gregorian melodies follow ancient patterns, rising and falling like breath itself, and in the cold darkness of the church, the sound seems to become physical, to fill the space between the stone columns and settle into the corners like incense. After the first prayers, as the sky begins to lighten almost imperceptibly, the monks return to their dormitory for a brief rest, or they remain in silent prayer in the church. Prime follows at dawn. Then chapter the daily meeting, where the rule is read, business is conducted, and faults are confessed. This is one of the few times when speaking is permitted, though even here words are measured and brief. The abbot sits in his chair, elevated slightly, and the community gathers before him. Any monk who has broken a rule or failed in his duties confesses openly, accepting whatever penance is assigned: additional prayers, fasting, or labor. Then comes work. The Cistercians, unlike some earlier monastic orders, believe deeply in manual labor. They are not scholars first, but farmers, gardeners, builders. They till their own fields, tend their own animals, maintain their own buildings. In the garden, several monks spend these morning hours weeding the vegetable beds, harvesting what is ready, planting what the season demands. Others work in the scriptorium, copying manuscripts with slow precision. Still others labor in the workshops, the bakery, the brewery, the forge, producing the basic necessities of communal life. The work is rhythmic and repetitive. A hoe rising and falling, a quill moving across parchment, a hammer striking iron. There is a meditative quality to it, a way in which the body's movement becomes a form of prayer. The mind, occupied with simple physical tasks, empties itself of anxiety and ambition. There is no competition here, no advancement, no recognition. Everyone eats the same food, wears the same clothes, sleeps in the same simple beds. The monk who tends the garden is not considered lesser than the monk who illuminates manuscripts. All work is sacred. All work is prayer. At midday, the bell rings for sext, another office of prayer. Then comes the main meal of the day, taken in the refectory, while one monk reads aloud from scripture or the lives of the saints. The food is simple bread, vegetables, sometimes fish, occasionally cheese. Meat is forbidden. The portions are sufficient but not generous. Eating, like everything else, is governed by the rule, which warns against the dangers of gluttony and encourages moderation in all things. The monks eat in silence, their attention divided between the food before them and the words being read, and when the meal is finished, they wash their hands and return to their work or to private prayer. The garden becomes most itself in the late afternoon, when the day's work is winding down and the light takes on a golden quality that softens everything it touches. The shadows lengthen between the rows of vegetables. The herbs release their scent more generously in the warmth. A bee moves from flower to flower with a drowsy persistence that mirrors the monk's own steady devotion. This is the hour when the monastery seems to breathe most deeply, when the accumulated silence of the day settles like a benediction over the walls and pathways. Brother Thomas, though, names are used sparingly here, and monks often address each other simply as brother walks the perimeter of the garden, checking the irrigation channels that carry water from the nearby stream. These channels are marvels of simple engineering, dug and maintained by the monks themselves over generations. The water flows according to gravity, dividing and subdividing through a network of smaller trenches until every bed receives its share. He adjusts a small wooden gate, redirecting flow from one section to another. The water murmurs as it moves, a sound so constant that it becomes part of the silence rather than an interruption of it. The medieval monastery garden, as documented in the detailed records of Cistercian houses across Europe, was never merely decorative. It was a pharmacy, a food source, a symbol of paradise regained through labor and devotion. Each plant had its purpose: sage for digestion, rue for eyesight, yarrow for wounds, mustard for preservation. The monks learned these properties through experience and through copying ancient texts, the works of Dioscorides, of Pliny, of earlier Christian herbalists who had preserved classical knowledge through the centuries of upheaval following Rome's decline. In one corner of the garden stands a pear tree, perhaps 40 years old. Its trunk gnarled and its branches trained along wires attached to the stone wall. The Cistercians are famous for their agricultural innovations. They have pioneered new methods of animal husbandry, developed more efficient ploughs, improved the breeding of sheep for better wool. But here, in the garden, innovation moves at the pace of seasons. The pear tree was planted by monks now dead. It will bear fruit for monks not yet born. Time stretches backward and forward, and the individual life becomes small, less significant, absorbed into the greater life of the community and the land. The monastery bell rings for none, the 9th hour, and the monks in the garden straighten slowly from their work, brushing soil from their hands. They form a loose procession, moving toward the church without haste. There is no rushing in monastic life. To rush would be to suggest that one place is more important than another, one activity more sacred than the rest. But here, all places are equally holy, all moments equally shot through with the presence of God. The garden, the church, the dormitory, the refectory, these are not separate realms, but parts of a unified whole, a world complete unto itself. Inside the church, the light filters through small windows set high in the walls. The Cistercians reject the elaborate stained glass of other orders, preferring clear or grisaille glass that admits light without the distraction of color or narrative imagery. The architecture itself embodies their philosophy: solid, functional, beautiful in its proportions, but never ornate. The columns are plain cylinders. The capitals are carved with simple leaf patterns, nothing more. The floor is paved with large stone slabs, worn smooth by centuries of sandaled feet. The monks take their places in the choir stalls, and their voices rise again in chant. The melody is ancient, passed down through generations, learned by ear rather than from notation. It fills the space naturally, without effort, like water filling a vessel. And in this moment, as in every moment throughout the day, the distinction between prayer and life dissolves. Everything is prayer. Everything is silence. Everything is peace. Evening descends slowly over the monastery, as it does over all of Burgundy in this season. The sun, moving toward the western horizon, casts long rays through the garden, illuminating the dust that hangs in the still air. The temperature begins to drop. The stone walls, which have absorbed heat throughout the day, now radiate it back gently, creating a microclimate within the cloister that remains mild even as the surrounding countryside cools. After Vespers, the evening office, the monks gather for their second and final meal of the day, a lighter affair than the midday meal, often consisting of bread, perhaps some fruit from the orchard, a cup of watered wine or ale. The reading continues, the voice of the lector rising and falling in the ancient cadences of Latin. Outside, the sky deepens from gold to rose to purple. The first stars appear, faint and distant. The period between the evening meal and compline, the final office before sleep, is one of the most treasured times of the monastic day. This is when the monks may walk in the cloister or sit in quiet conversation, though even conversation is subdued. Brief, focused on matters of the spirit rather than worldly concerns. Some return to the garden, not to work now, but simply to be present in it, to walk the paths in the gathering dusk, to observe the way the light fades and the shadows merge. The garden at twilight becomes a threshold space, neither day nor night, neither fully visible nor fully hidden. The plants lose their individual colors and become silhouettes, shapes without detail. The scent of herbs grows stronger in the cooling air, thyme and rosemary, sage and lavender, mixing with the smell of damp earth and the faint smoke from the kitchen fires. A bat emerges from the eaves of the cloister, swooping low over the garden beds in pursuit of insects. Its flight is erratic but purposeful, and the monks who witness it understand it as part of the order of creation, each creature fulfilling its role in the great web of being. The silence of the monastery at this hour is profound, but not empty. It is filled with small sounds that would be inaudible in a noisier world: the settling of stones as they cool, the rustle of leaves in a breath of wind, the distant hoot of an owl in the forest beyond the walls. This is the silence that the rule of Saint Benedict prizes above almost all other virtues. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of attention. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of fullness. The monks have learned, through years of practice, to hear what the world speaks when human voices cease. At the sound of the bell for compline, they gather in the church one final time. The office is brief: a handful of psalms, a hymn, a blessing. Then the great silence begins, lasting until prime the following morning. From this moment until dawn, no word will be spoken except in cases of extreme emergency. The monks file out of the church and move through the dark corridors to their dormitory. They undress quietly, folding their habits with practiced precision, and lie down on their narrow beds. Sleep comes easily to those who rise at 2 in the morning. The body, tired from honest labor, demands rest. The mind, emptied by hours of prayer and silence, offers little resistance. One by one, the monks sink into sleep, their breathing deepening and slowing. The monastery settles into the stillness of night. The garden, unseen now in the darkness, continues its slow work of growing. The plants drawing moisture from the soil, the roots extending deeper, the leaves turning imperceptibly toward where the sun will rise. Everything waits, everything rests. Everything is as it should be. The monastery exists outside of time, or perhaps within a different kind of time, the linear march from past to future that governs the world beyond its walls. But a circular time, a return that is also a renewal. Each day repeats the pattern of the day before, and yet each day is somehow fresh, unrepeated itself. The prayers are the same prayers that were said yesterday and will be said tomorrow, but they are also new, spoken by voices that have changed infinitesimally. In a church where the light falls differently, where the temperature has shifted by a degree or two, where the inner life of each monk has been altered by another day of seeking. This is the paradox at the heart of monastic peace. It comes not from variety, but from repetition, not from novelty, but from return. The modern mind, hungry for stimulation and change, might find such a life unbearable. But for those called to it, the monastic rhythm offers something the chaotic world cannot provide: a deep sense of stability, of rootedness, of belonging to something larger and more enduring than the individual self. The garden embodies this principle perfectly. It changes with the seasons: bare in winter, green in spring, flowering in summer. harvested in autumn, but it remains essentially itself. The same beds are planted year after year. The same paths are walked. The same walls enclose the same earth. And in this constancy, in this patient returning, there is a profound peace. The monk who plants seeds knows he may not live to see them mature. The monk who tends a tree does so for the benefit of brothers he will never meet. This is generosity extended across time, work undertaken not for personal gain, but for the continuation of the community, the tradition, the vision of a life lived in accordance with divine order. The Abbey of Cîteaux, where this quiet day has unfolded, will continue for centuries beyond the year 1243. It will survive wars and plagues, reforms and rebellions. The garden will be replanted countless times. The stones of the church will be repaired and replaced. New generations of monks will rise at 2 a.m. and walk these same corridors, their feet tracing the paths worn smooth by their predecessors. And though each generation will live in its own historical moment, will face its own challenges and changes, the essential rhythm of the life will remain constant. In our own age, more than 780 years removed from that quiet afternoon, the monastic ideal still speaks to something deep within the human spirit. We live in a world of noise and speed, of constant distraction and endless stimulation. The silence of the monastery garden seems impossibly remote, a relic of a vanished world. And yet the hunger for that silence persists. We recognize, however dimly, that we have lost something essential, some capacity for attention, for patience, for presence. The monks of Cîteaux knew something we have forgotten, that peace is not found by escaping from structure and commitment, but by embracing them. That freedom is not the absence of discipline, but its fruit. That silence is not empty, but full of all the things we miss when we will not stop talking, will not stop moving, will not stop filling every moment with activity and noise. The garden sleeps now under the medieval stars, the same stars that shine over us tonight. The monastery breathes in the darkness, and somewhere in that stillness, in that simple repetition of prayer and work and sleep, in that patient tending of earth and soul, lies a secret we are still trying to learn. The day ends where it began, in darkness, in silence, in peace. And tomorrow it will begin again. The bell will ring. The monks will rise. The garden will wait. And the quiet work of centuries will continue. One day, one prayer, one breath at a time.